Welcome back. Before we start on today's reading, I wanted to touch on a term that was revealed in the last reading, the term divine will. Now, when you hear terms like divine will or God, you probably conjure an image of the Judeo-Christian God, some kind of a non-physical being that is disconnected from the universe, maybe existing outside of the universe, is omnipotent, all powerful, all knowing, all loving, who sometimes intervenes in the universe, but is not a physical thing. So it cannot be explained by the laws of physics. Um, Now, if you are an atheist, you think that no such thing exists. And if you are presented with a piece of Stoic reasoning or an article that you're reading that's meant to help you with a life problem or think of the world a bit differently in Stoic terms, and you come across terms like divine will and God, then you're probably going to find yourself getting caught up in those terms and then miss the overall message or the meaning that the Stoic piece is trying to get across. And that's fair enough, right? There's no point giving a piece of Stoic advice to an atheist that if the advice includes reference to God. So how can we help? What do the Stoics actually mean when they use terms like divine will and God? Well, they probably don't mean God in the Judeo-Christian sense of the word. The Stoics were materialists. Another word for that is physicalists. And that means they believe that the universe is only made out of physical things, physical matter, physical energy, stuff that can be described by the laws of physics, right? Described or explained by the laws of physics. So the Stoics don't think that there are non-physical entities like God, right? Everything is physical. So when they use the term divine will or God, they're not talking about the non-physical type of Judeo-Christian God. The Stoics probably could be considered pantheists, which means they think that God and the universe are much the same thing. Right? God is kind of the embodiment of the laws of physics, or perhaps another way of looking at it is that God is embodied within the laws of physics, perhaps. The God is actually the laws of physics, or the thing that breathes fire into the laws of physics, something like that. I like to compare it to our use of the term life. Now, um, we throw that term around and we pretty much know what it means. Um, but when you ask a biologist or a chemist what life is, they will reduce the word to biological, things, cellular behavior. Or the chemist might reduce the term life to chemical interactions, right? Or sorry, reactions, chemical reactions, which is fine. It's probably exactly what life is. However, when we use the term life, we tend to be meaning something more than that, don't we? Uh, Even though it's not something we can point to precisely. And so I'd rather think that the Stoics' use of the term God might be similar to that. So, how's it going to help an atheist? Well, I think if you are an atheist and you want to read Stoic philosophy and you encounter the terms God or divine will, you should just do a mental swap, replace those terms with laws of nature or laws of physics. And if you do that, I think the passage will still make sense and will be useful for you. Okay, today's reading is not from Epictetus, it is from my own fictional version of Socrates. It's what I call a Socratic meditation that I wrote, where Socrates is reflecting this time on death and whether or not death should be feared. So I will read it from the laptop screen here for you. Death, the forbidden topic. It is forbidden, I think, because it is feared. You moderns, much like we ancients, do everything you can to avoid death. You alter your bodies to appear younger. You spend a fortune on medical treatments, and your scientists research life extension, as if death is a disease that can be cured. But it cannot be cured. And although I have no real wisdom, I know enough to realize that accepting the inevitability of death is wise. I also believe that the wise person does not fear death. I wonder if people fear death because they have knowledge of what death is like. I do not know how they could acquire such knowledge. Perhaps they think they know what death is like, but that is uncertain. Death may be the end of the soul, or it could, as many religious people think, be the transportation of the soul to a new life. What that life is like, no one can know. Either way, we do not know what happens to the soul at death. I ask people, do you fear going to a movie you have never seen? They say, no. I ask, do you fear eating in a new restaurant? They say, no. And yet, I suggest, you fear death? Is it not just another unknown, just as the unseen movie and the new restaurant are unknowns? They agree to this point. So I ask, is it wise to fear the unknown? And they concede that it is not wise. What happens at death is unknown, so it is not wise to fear it. But people say they fear missing out on living. That is why they fear death. To this I ask, do you feel fearful about the time of non-living prior to your birth? They reply that they have no such fear. So I ask, why do they fear the time of non-living in the future? Is it not the same after all? By Zeus, this is a difficult question for people to answer. They seem to rate the loss of their own life highly. They do not fear the time before birth because they had not yet experienced life. The time after living, however, is a loss of something they had. But I remind them that if the soul survives, then there is no loss. And if the soul is destroyed, they do not experience the loss. So there is nothing to fear. Perhaps it is the anticipation of death that people fear. When they realize that life is finite, they ruminate on it and become fearful as the end approaches. I ask people, do you fear the end of a symphony when you are halfway through? They say no. And this is of no surprise. The wise person enjoys a symphony and is not fearful that the symphony will soon end. Would we not be wise to treat life in the same way? We all experience something like death every day. It happens when we go to sleep. During a dreamless sleep, we have a length of time of seeming non-existence. Now, we do not fear going to sleep at night. Therefore, we do not fear seeming non-existence. So why fear death? When I pose this question to people, they tell me that this situation is different. When they go to sleep, they know they will awaken, but they do not know that they will awaken after death. I respond by asking, do you really know you will wake up after going to sleep? People will often accept that they don't know it, but it is likely. So people believe they will awaken after sleeping, and therefore they do not fear sleep in the same way that they fear death. But why? Because they believe they will not awaken after dying. I must at this point refer back to our earlier point about knowledge. No one knows they will not wake up after death because no one knows what happens to the soul after death. Nevertheless, I ask people how they feel about waking up each morning. Most people just want to go back to sleep. People are most remarkable creatures. They don't fear sleep because they know they will wake up. Yet upon waking, they only want to go back to sleep. On the other hand, people fear death because they believe they will not wake up and will continue to sleep. Is it better to be at risk of harm or at no risk of harm? The answer to this question will lead us to a conclusion about whether or not death should be feared. Let us assume that death is the end of suffering. Let us assume that no harm can come to someone after death. Now, if it is better to be at no risk of harm, and if no harm can come to one after death, then death should not be feared. These thoughts are based on my dialogues with people over the years, and it seems that when carefully considered, wise people should not fear death. Still, we are human with human weaknesses. Socrates. I hope you enjoyed that short passage, and I will be back soon with another one for you.